from another realm where water scarcity has been a fact of life for more than 100 years, and yet there is an almost total unwillingness to acknowledge that water is scarce, to confront the facts of scarcity, and to manage it. And this realm has some of the same characteristics as Alberta and has had longer experience with water scarcity, from which it has seemed to learn very little. Here in its orbit is that realm, and it's called the state of California. It turns out that spatial variability in California is less extreme than it is here in Alberta, with 2/3 of the water in the north and 2/3 of the population in the south. Now, I want to show you some more detailed maps that I think will be of interest. This is simply a more detailed map of the map that you just saw, which shows in percentage terms the percent of statewide supply in the numerator, that's the top of the fraction, and the percent of statewide use in the denominator. And the colored hydrologic basins are the ones that really need to be noticed. In the north, you can look at the North Coast Basin, which provides 37% of the water. It's a little bit like the Athabasca River, and only 3% of the use. And the Sacramento Basin, which accounts for 31% of the water and 22% of the use. Then come down to Southern California. The TB is the Tulare Basin, a huge and prosperous agricultural area that produces only 5% of its own water and yet uses almost 1/4 of the water statewide. And then down in the lower left corner, the South Coast Basin, the home of Los Angeles and San Diego, and that enormous urban area where you only get 2% of the statewide supply, but 11% of the use. The fundamental strategy for dealing with this pattern of spatial scarcity over time has been to build a maze of dams and canals to move places, Shasta Dam, to store that water, and then move it from places where it is plentiful and times where it is plentiful to places where it is not and times where it is not. Just another canal. Now I want to show you 4 maps which illustrate the extent to which the state is plumbed this way. This is the Central Valley Project. Look at the top there at Lake, I don't know if you can see in the back, but the 2 yellow dots, one of those is Shasta Dam, which I just showed you. And the yellow lines are simply canals that move water, the Central Valley Project, from the north to the Great Central Valley, largely for agricultural purposes. Next picture, this is the State Water Project, which moves water from the yellow dot up there down through the Central Valley with some use there into the South Coast urban area, where it is one of the main sources of supply for Los Angeles, San Diego, and all of the suburban areas. It is important to point out that these 2 projects consume 1/4, 25% of all the energy that is consumed in California. That's a very important point, and it leads to what I call an import caution, a caution to those that may be tempted to copy or ape this strategy, because anyone who imports water from a remote basin effectively marries the price of the water to the price of energy, and the price of energy doesn't show signs of being very stable in the coming decades. Excuse me. Now let me show you the other 2 maps. San Francisco Bay Area gets its supplies remotely, and finally the Los Angeles area gets its supplies from 3 sources and then from within its own basin. I want to draw your attention particularly to the supply on the right from the Owens Valley. If you've seen the movie Chinatown, you will be familiar with this story of how the city of Los Angeles went to the Owens Valley and surreptitiously bought up land and bought up the water pertinent to the land in order to produce a water supply that would allow it to grow to something like its current form. The difficulty was that nobody had ever defined what water was appurtenant to the land. And so we have been treated to over 100 years of conflict and legal maneuvering and violence over one or another issues related to the export of water from the Owens Valley to Los Angeles. And this is perhaps the most dramatic example of import caution number 2, which is that in fact when you import from another basin, no matter how empty the basin, you end up marrying it whether you want to or not. And its concerns become your concerns. The population of the Owens Valley, for example, believes that the city of Los Angeles has a responsibility to solve all their problems. Water that is not used, or water in areas that are not populated, becomes a football because environmentalists and other groups feel that water should be left there. So, the overall point that I want to make here with my import cautions is that one who would seek to import from other areas faces not one, but 2 shotgun weddings. A wedding to the price of energy and a wedding to the populations and the environmental characteristics of the basins of origin. Now, I want to suggest to you this evening that this strategy has not served us on the other planet very well. Fundamentally, it has been a strategy of allocating water away from environmental uses to support consumptive uses, both urban and agricultural. It has been accomplished at enormous public expense, and it has done significant environmental damage, which, in fairness, was recognized only recently. In addition, by seeming to solve our scarcity problems by making new increments of water available where physical scarcity loomed, it contributed to the formation of a widely held belief in California that water supplies are virtually limitless. Today, this strategy of moving water around has been exhausted. It is largely an infeasible way to meet new demands. There isn't any water to move. It's already fully allocated. And the cost of building facilities to move water is now enormously expensive in a state that is more than broke. Water policies have been in a stalemate for the last 3 decades, largely because of the refusal of water-using groups and the public to acknowledge that it is scarce. The principal characteristic of the stalemate is that each of the water-using sectors, urban, agricultural, and environmental, has enough political clout to veto any proposal from the other 2. I recently, and I mean very recently, served on the panel of the U.S. Academy of Sciences to review one of the latest water plans for California. The plan, which in its current state is totally unacceptable, took 6 years and $150 million to complete. It is 1,100 pages long, and it has 5,000 pages of appendices, and it does not even mention the word scarcity. So the first lesson from the other planet, that's the second one, is to acknowledge water scarcity and deal with it. And more importantly, don't ignore it. Be willing to acknowledge that though water may appear to be abundant, water resources have already been fully allocated de facto among both consumptive uses and in-stream uses. Our failure to do this in California has left us with a water supply that is substantially oversubscribed. And we have learned very late in the game that development of water for consumptive uses comes at the expense of in-stream uses that then cannot be served. And some of the losses in in-stream uses have themselves been extremely costly. The single most difficult problem that we face is the problem of reducing water entitlements to eliminate the oversubscription. And this is a problem that we've got to solve if we're going to find ways of providing water to support future population and economic growth.